Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, January 17th, 2022, and in yesterday's video, I talked about the United States Senate elections and how the Republican Party could reach a majority that was the peak of this map's possibility, meaning that if everything went right for the GOP, here's how the Republican Party could reach a majority that was actually 55 seats to the Democratic Party's 45. Now, the thing about this Senate map, and I mention this all the time about how the Democratic Party is benefiting from this map, is the fact that there are very few swing states. Taking a look at our true swing states, meaning states that are within the tilt and toss-up column, you have about 8 states at this point in time. You have Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, New Hampshire for the 4 Democratic seats that are competitive, and for the Republican seats, you have Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida. I meant to include likely in that group, and it would also categorize Ohio and the state of Colorado. But in terms of our primary and main focuses, we don't really talk about them much for whatever reason. But the purpose of this is to show that there are avenues beyond our standard type of characterization for the Democratic Party when it comes down to their possibility of winning a majority and going beyond that. Right now, the Democratic Party stands at 50-50 when you are looking at the United States Senate elections, and that's just how it is. But the 50-50 map obviously wouldn't cut it for the Democratic Party. They would very clearly need to win more than 50 seats if they are to reach their maximum potential. And with this maximum potential being included in this discussion and in this type of hypothetical, that means that margins are going to shift. That means safe Republican seats might no longer be safe in this reality, because they might have been narrowly safe back in the 2022 ratings that I did in early January of this year, or in November 2021, or even back when Biden was popular in July, May and April and June of 2021. So some of these states are going to change slightly in terms of characterization, nothing super drastic. I mean, it's not all of a sudden, Idaho going blue, but what it is just a subtle change in direction, which could indicate somewhat of a tsunami type of year that 2022 definitely isn't shaping up to be for the Democratic Party, and not necessarily even for the Republican Party either, but it is for just the sake of this video. So the Democratic Party starts out with a total of 46 safe seats straight off the bat. These are seats that they really won't be too heavily focused on. This is just the seats that in this scenario are already going to go towards the Democratic Party. Many of these seats are not even up for re-election, so keep that in mind as well. But the point is, straight off the bat, they have 46 seats. The Republicans don't have 30. The Republican Party has more than 30, and we can characterize those right now. I mean, they are pretty obvious. You have Idaho, North and South Dakota, Utah, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Kansas. The reason why I say Alaska is because the top 2 candidates there are Republicans, unfortunately for the Democratic Party. You have Kentucky, you have Indiana, you have Alabama, and you have South Carolina. But notice how I left out Missouri and Iowa, 2 states that I routinely characterize as safe. And those are probably the least safe out of the safe states for the GOP, but it doesn't mean they're not safe in a normal, or at least in 2022. But looking at our map here, we are left with 11 seats that are true toss-ups. Now, I'm sure you can see the extent of where the Democratic Party gets their majority from after I've already characterized the safe Republican seats, meaning that if we were to add every single one of these seats to the Democratic column, it would put them at 57. But I don't exactly expect them to win every single one of these seats. Some of these seats are so ingrained for the GOP that it becomes very difficult to see how the Democratic Party can actually end up winning, especially with incumbents in states like Iowa. Now, straight off the bat, the Democratic Party, of course, has all of these safe seats, but they would also have likely seats, seats that are very likely to go to a certain political party and would be decided between 5 and 15% in favor of the Democrats for right now. And those are states that currently have Democratic incumbents, and I would honestly be fine characterizing them as likely. And the reason why I'm fine characterizing them is because, one, New Hampshire has already been there. The past Senate election in 2020 went to the Democratic candidate, the Democratic incumbent at that, by over 15 points. The state of Nevada in 2018 voted for Jackie Rosen over Dean Heller as the Republican incumbent at that time by just over 5 percentage points. And the state of Arizona voted for Mark Kelly by 2.4. So to see it move over beyond 5% isn't too much to expect. And the same thing with Raphael Warnock in the state of Georgia when he already won in 2021 by 2 points. It would just merely be a 3-point shift, if not more. And that would already bring the Democrats to 50 to 43, leaving a total of 7 seats at this point in time that are within this quote-unquote toss-up column. But the toss-up characterization doesn't tell the full story. Like there are likely Democratic seats, there are likely Republican seats as well. And it is something that needs to be pointed out. The state of Missouri starts out as our first likely Democratic seat. I think that, likely Republican seat. I think that's something that already needs to be said, simply because Missouri has been pretty solid for the Republican Party, and it doesn't really make sense to all of a sudden shift it over to the Democratic Party. Looking at Iowa and Missouri, they don't vote in unison. I think that's something that I do want to clarify, because I'm going to characterize them back to back, but I don't want to confuse them. Missouri could be competitive because of the Republican candidates there that could bring it down for the GOP, and in a Democrat pro environment, I'm just assuming that's going to happen. But for the state of Iowa, it would just be due to the fact that Iowa won't be a plus 15 red state in a super blue national environment, where Missouri might be able to if the candidates just weren't as negative for the GOP as they are in this actual election. So the state of Missouri for right now, I'm going to characterize as likely red. Looking at the state of Iowa, I'm also going to characterize it as likely red, even though we know Chuck Grassley is going to be that GOP nominee. And with his immense popularity, that's why the race doesn't narrow down into going to the Democratic column. I think if the state of Iowa was facing Republicans that were just as bad for the state in terms of electability as they were in the state of Missouri, it could definitely be within competitive nature. But because they have an incumbent who has been a long-standing popular senator for quite some time, the right Democratic environment could narrow it down, but it just isn't enough to win. So that puts the Republicans at 45 and the Democrats at 50, leaving us a total of 5 seats to the Democratic Party's possibility of victory. Looking at the states, some of them they actually won in the past 20 years. For instance, they won actually every single one of these in 2008. They won 4 out of the 5 in 2012. Then they won 0 out of the 5 in 2016, and then they won 2 out of the 5 in 2020. The states that they did not win since the 2008 election, North Carolina, then since 2012, Ohio, and Florida. But the Democrats flipped back Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And those would be the first states that I turn to when it comes down to this map. The first state would be Wisconsin going blue, and it wouldn't be by an overwhelmingly large margin, but it would still be a blue state. The thing about Ron Johnson with his newly announced re-election bid is that he has had no time to campaign, whereas Democrats have had so many more months. He will have the rest of the year to campaign, of course, and he already has a recognizable name as the incumbent 2-term senator, but there is something to be said about not even engaging with your own electorate when you are amidst an extremely competitive race in what is expected to be an extremely competitive year. So seeing the state of Wisconsin in its full glory, the Democrats could very well win this Senate seat, and I would not be shocked, especially in an environment like this, because it's possible in a traditional type of environment. Do I think it'll be likely? Probably not. I think that because of the way that we are right now, it's just going to be difficult to oust a Republican incumbent by a significant amount, but it could end up happening. I think it narrows on the edge of being a 5, potentially a 6-point victory, which would nudge it back up into the likely column, but it definitely would take a significant amount of support for the Democratic Party, which they very well could get. The state of Pennsylvania, on the contrary, I think could go likely blue. And I say this because this is an open race. There isn't a Republican incumbent to run in this race, and Republicans right now are without direction in this race. Conor Lamb, John Fetterman, both of which are leading the Democratic primary. John Fetterman slightly over Conor Lamb. But Conor Lamb, I think, would do better in this election, but I think both would win if the environment was as pro-Dem as we are expecting it to be in this type of hypothetical. The state of Pennsylvania is a state where the Democrats have had a recent success. Wisconsin is almost always close. Pennsylvania sometimes has pretty solid margins for the Democratic Party. It also voted for Biden more than the state of Wisconsin did by about double the margin, and the state is just simply larger. And the fact that it's an open race makes it much more attainable for the Democrats than a race with an incumbent. But Ron Johnson isn't necessarily the most popular incumbent, so that's why it's not as big of a factor as it might otherwise be. Looking at the states of Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida, these are the 3 outstanding states. How are they going to go? Well, the first one that I could say with a good amount of certainty is the state of Florida. Even though this is a year where the Democrats are going to do well, I do think that Marco Rubio would hold on. I think he would hold on, number one, because he does well with minority voters. He is able to win over Hispanic voters, specifically Cuban voters, in a way that many other Republicans failed to do, besides President Trump in the 2020 election. He also does well with white voters. There's a reason why in the 2016 election, he outran President Trump by 7 points. Now, Florida is also a state that is very much immune to wave years, which is why, again, it's not a blue seat. Marco Rubio will be pretty solid regardless if it's a red wave year, a blue wave year, or an in-between year. Number one, because he is the incumbent, and Florida loves a lot of their incumbents, especially Republicans, and also the fact that he already has so much residual support from that 20-point victory in 2010 to that 8-point victory in 2016. And while it seems like a rapid decline, taking a look at the first election, it shouldn't really have been such a large victory, but it was because of vote split between independent and Democrat. But the state of Florida, for the sake of 2022, still is going to lean towards the right, and I think Marco Rubio definitely has that inherent advantage just coming from a state that is actually much redder than the rest of the nation that people don't often realize. Florida isn't a lost cause for the Democrats, but I think Marco Rubio individually is one of the strongest GOP candidates that comes out of the state, arguably stronger than Rick Scott, even his counterpart in the United States Senate, and it's enough for me to characterize the state of Florida as still a lean red seat. Now, moving on to the next two seats, you have Ohio and North Carolina. Now, I think one of these is going to be easier to characterize than the other, and it probably is the one you're expecting. It's the state of North Carolina where Sherry Beasley is currently the front runner on the Democratic side, the former Supreme Court Justice from the state of North Carolina, the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. Now, she lost her election back in 2000, and she is still going to be facing against a top GOP nominee, whether it's Pat McCrory, Mark Walker, or Ted Budd. My bet is on Ted Budd in terms of that Republican primary. But I do want to say that the thing is, North Carolina, while resistant to waves, wouldn't be resistant to a tsunami. It would be enough to move it over to the Democratic column, but not by a significant amount. I think our Senate match here is pretty adequately matched up. Looking at the Republicans and the Democrats, when it comes down to the general election in a non-tsunami type of year, I mean, our traditional 2022 expectations, I still think it'll be pretty competitive. While I think the GOP will win by a likely margin, we're talking maybe 6 to 7 points at most. And if Joe Biden recovers and Democrats do on the generic ballot, who's to say that it doesn't narrow down further than that? I mean, this scenario would require a rapid reduction of hate against Joe Biden and a significant improvement for the Democratic Party on the national average. But even with that significant improvement, it's still going to be difficult to see North Carolina move anything further than lean D. Even in environments like 2008, when Obama was demolishing McCain in all of the swing states, he only won North Carolina by less than a point and 14,000 votes. I mean, it was 14,000 votes. Obama won Indiana by a larger margin. Keep that in mind, right? And then Indiana, just 4 years later, voted 19 points for, 8 years later, voted 19 points in favor of Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. And 2018, perfect example of a Democrat +8 national environment. North Carolina didn't even flip blue on the House of Representatives. Flipped blue, though, in 2020, despite the national environment only being Democrat +3, +4, which meant maybe it isn't as determining of a factor, but it definitely goes to show that even with Democrats in the advantage, or by higher advantage, it doesn't always equate to a strong Democratic performance in North Carolina, which is why, at most, I would characterize it as lean D. And I think Ohio should share that characterization. I think that Ohio could be in a position where if Josh Mandel, and I say this, Josh Mandel's name for a reason, he was the 2012 nominee for Senate and lost to Sherrod Brown. He ran in 2018, dropped out for family reasons, divorced from his wife now, and we can see what those family reasons were, not to try to in any way attack or go after that family reason, but it explains why he exited from the race, and now he's an entirely new person when it comes down to these Senate elections. I mean, Josh Mandel, in essence, is grifting when it looks what it looks like in terms of the Senate election. He is taking positions that he previously did not take, more extreme viewpoints and ideologies that he did not take before, in an effort to win over the Trump base / electorate. Josh Mandel was previously much more of a replica or embodiment of Senator Romney or Representative Paul Ryan. I think that would have been a fairer estimation then, because that's what worked for the GOP. But he knows what works now, and he wants to win that nomination. If he wins that nomination, I'm telling you right now, Ohio will not be as safe as if it is another Republican, because he has taken such extreme positions that a state like Ohio isn't going to just all of a sudden, turn a blind eye. Ohio does still have very competitive races. Take a look at a bunch of elections. Even though Trump may have won by a margin of about 8 points, 8 points isn't enough to counteract a blue type of tsunami if the Democratic Party has the right candidate, Tim Ryan, which they do, and the Republicans don't have the right candidate. While Iowa also voted for Trump by about 8 points, it has a different characterization because of who the candidates are, not necessarily because of the state. And that's the big difference here. Ohio and Iowa seem to have been voting very similar together, but they have very different ratings on this map. So in this final map, this brings the Democrats to 54 Senate seats to the Republican Party's 46. Democrats flip Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Ohio. They win with likely margins in Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia. They still lose Florida and Iowa, but those weren't really the main targets for Democrats in the first place, and by the end of this map, Democrats reach their near highest majority, or their highest from what I expect right now, at 54 to 46. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.